Good evening. Welcome to the live stream from Hobart of our To The Point episode tonight, The Art of Aging. Thank you for bearing with us. We've had a few little technological problems. There have been power outages in Hobart. We haven't had snow in the lower reaches of the city, but there has been a fair bit around the hills around the city, and I think the Midlands Highway from Hobart to Launceston has been cut. Spent most of the afternoon around 5 degrees, only had a maximum of 7, but so much for the weather. A very warm welcome to you all. And we've got 2 guests from Hobart, and we've got 2 guests from South Australia. I'm going to ask, start with Catherine, if she could introduce herself. Can you introduce yourself, Catherine? Sure. And just share a little bit with us why you have been invited to be a guest on this program.
Sure. Hi, my name's Catherine Hardenreich. I'm married to Jonathan Heidenreich. I have 2 beautiful daughters who are teenage girls. I've been a registered nurse for around about 23 years. In the last 16 years, I've been working in aged care. I've worked in various places around Australia in different aged care institutions, and I've worked both as a registered nurse on the floor working with the residents, as well as in some management roles off and on throughout that time. So I guess my reason for being here tonight would be simply as someone who's still working in aged care, in particular at this time when it's we're also looking at the pandemic and the impact it's had on the aged care industry. Yeah, that's it really.
Excellent. Well, there's some family ties in tonight's show, and I'll get Lorraine to introduce herself and maybe talk about her family relationship with another panellist.
Yes, I'm Lorraine Semmler. I am Catherine's mother. I have 2 other children and 5 granddaughters and 3 other grandchildren. I'm a registered nurse. Years ago I did my midwifery, general nursing, midwifery. I had 3 children, 10 years home looking after them. And I've had 24 years aged care experience since that time. 12 years of that was in management of aged care facilities, and I'm now retired. So I guess you're always a nurse, but and the other interest, I guess, is that I'm myself getting into the older years, and that was brought home when we had the lockdown with the pandemic recently. We were told that 60 plus you should be very careful because we're in that age bracket and at more risk of other people. So that's me.
Well, thank you for that, Lorraine. And Alwin, welcome to you, Pastor Alwin Schirmer. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Mike, and hello to everybody else. My experience in aged care specifically was a period of my ministry where for 14 years in Bundaberg I was the aged care pastor in that parish, based at our own care facility called Grace Haven, and in that period I was able to work there as a chaplain, and it was a very long ministry and an intense one because of the size of the facility, plus also the community work that I did. It was a very enriching time because I think apart from going in there just as a parish pastor and then learning what it's like for people at that end of life to work and to live. In that period, I was confronted particularly by the issues of grief and loss. And part of that was the opportunity to do some extra studies, postgraduate studies in that under Judith Murray, who's one of our Lutheran um, members of the church, and she's an expert in counselling and also in loss and grief. And that was very enlightening for me to sort of have that vision into people's lives with the experience of grief and loss. Maybe that'll come up later in the discussion. I'm retired now, and at Pasadena Lutheran Village, and so I also belong to the cohort of the older people. But it's good to be here where I am now, experiencing the whole ageing thing from the end of the people I ministered to. So I feel that I've joined the club, so to speak. When I got my first knee replacement, the people in the home said to me, "Now you belong to us," but I do it in a more full sense now as well. I'll pass on from there.
Well, talking of relationships too, Alwin and I had a working relationship, a team ministry in the Manham Palmer Parish, about an hour east of Adelaide by the River Murray there, probably for a couple of years just before Alwin retired. And he was also vicar at Gawler when Lorraine was there quite a number of moons ago. Another relationship, my father, retired pastor Lance Steicke, if you can introduce yourself by telling us a little bit about yourself. And perhaps also this has been rescheduled, and you can perhaps share with us the reasons why, Dad.
Thank you very much. Alwin, you're the one person who's out. We've got a mother and daughter and father and son relationship here. Tough like you're on the outer. It was 8 weeks ago today that this discussion was supposed to have been held. It was deferred because on the evening of the Tuesday that it was to be held, my wife and Mike's mother died and is now with the Lord, to whom we give all thanks, praise, honour and glory. My reason for being on the panel, apart from the fact that I have a son who invited me, is a little bit unknown to me. I don't have any credential in my background. I've not been a nurse, I haven't been a doctor, I haven't been a pastor working in aged care ministry. My only qualification, I guess, is experience. I'm experiencing old age, more so than you, Alwin, and Lorraine, and certainly the other two youngsters on this panel. I'm experiencing old age. Having said that, I guess every stage in life is an experience. I've been experiencing old age since the day that I was born, because the day that we are born, we are moving towards the day that we die, towards old age. But it's a privilege to be on the panel. It's a privilege to share, hopefully to share experiences with you and to hear of your experiences also.
Look, thanks to each one of you for joining. And Alwin's mentioned grief and loss. I know some of you have had some experience in different ways with Alzheimer's or the loss of memory. We can look at some of those things, but also some of the very practical things. When should a person go into aged care? There seems to be increasing supports now for people to stay in homes, but difficult decisions in those areas we can look at. But just the fact of aging, I remember, Dad, once you saying something along the lines of, you can't fight it, you've got to go with it in many ways. Do you want to just expand on that a little bit?
At my 70th birthday party, in my speech, I said that I thank God for the biblical 70 that I've reached so far, and now every year from now on will be a year of extended grace. Every year we're in the Lord's hands. Mike, can you jog me with your question again?
You can't fight it. You've got to go with it.
Oh, yes. Yes, I think we have to learn to live in the present, look forward to the future, and thank God for the past. But there's no point in fighting against it. We tend, I think, with aging, to live in a state of denial. When people turn 40, they want to deny the fact that they've reached middle age. In old age, we want to deny the fact that our mortality is getting closer. So we live in a state of denial, despite the fact that people my age will proudly say when asked, how old are you? Should I apologise for asking? And we'll say proudly, no, you shouldn't apologise. I am 87. I'm 87. I thank God for it. I've never been 87 before. I'm experiencing some things that I wish perhaps years ago, I wish that I couldn't experience when I'm 87, but it's a new experience for me. And what's the good of fighting it? I may as well live in it, enjoy it, thank God for it, and seek his direction in it.
Well, thanks for that. We might come back to some of those things a little later, but living in the present, the moment, I think you've got some thoughts on that, Lorraine, and I guess the different seasons we have, different opportunities as we progress through life.
Yes, I believe, and I have for a long time now, that there is a season for everything. When you're 20, you've got plenty of energy, you're getting married, you may starting a career. And so it goes on with, as you have your children, you're involved in different, God has you involved in different activities. There's Sunday school, youth, and there are seasons. And I think on that note too, we need to bloom, to embrace that season at the time, look, and then move on. And before you know it, you're in the next season. And okay, Lord, you've got me here. What do you want me to do here now? And yes, to bloom, to serve Him where you are in that season of your life.
Absolutely. So different phases of life gives us different opportunities, and maybe we serve God more through our employment at a certain point in life, and raising our children later on. There may be more time to do community involvement more in the church, and some wonderful members who have provided great contributions over the time of my ministry have been people who have become retired and have a little bit more time on their hands, and I'm ever so grateful for that. Alwin, something I heard you share once, back in Manham, it was at a ladies' zone day, I think, three stages of ageing. Are you able to, I found that quite fascinating, and it did resonate with me. Are you able to explain a little bit in these concepts?
Yes, thanks, Mike. Actually, this is not original from my point of view, but I remember actually one of our American Lutheran pastors brought this to me, William Holm, where he talked of the three ages. Now, most people would be familiar with the 3 ages of life, if we could divide it by, into 3 ages. Our younger age, our middle age, and our third age. And the third age probably is familiar to some people. I know there's an organisation called the University of the Third Age, where people of that age sort of take the opportunity to learn things and show their worth and at that point. But William Holm, on a more specific level, pointed out that when we get to retirement, we're in the first stage of aging. And he's thinking, of course, in a broad stroke way, because these things can vary for different people concerning health and so on. But in a general sort of sense, we retire, and they can be very, very challenging and interesting years where there can be the rest from the labour, there can be the opportunity to go and travel, there can be the opportunity to do some of the things you've always wanted to do now that you don't have to work and bring up children and everything like that. And that idea of retirement is the first of that period. He says there comes another stage, though, which is a middle stage of aging, when probably you start to realise that all of those things have been done. There are a few things going wrong in life, and you're starting to just not keep up as much anymore. And you sort of move into that age. You're still active, but you're not as active as. And that period is can be quite an extension of time too. And then he moves into what sometimes people think is aging, and that is when we are frail, and the frailty sets in, and that can be a prolonged time for many people too. It's a very difficult stage when all things start to break down, and we're familiar with that in terms of our challenges in aged care these days, to look after people who perhaps have so many needs that they have to be perhaps cared for in a facility like an aged care institution, or otherwise nowadays through all the care provisions that can be made for people at home. And I think when we're thinking of aging, I think we need to break it up and perhaps consider just where I am in that, or just who we are talking about in that regard. And it helps to have a more enlightened and edifying conversation about aging. Which one are we talking about? So that was that particular thought.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, Alwin, in that some of you would have heard of Dr. Jean Veith, wrote the book Spirituality of the Cross, a retired literary professor, has a blog called the Blog of Veith, I think it is, Cranach, it's called Cranach. And I remember him posting there and saying that even though he's retired and aging, he actually felt at a good place in life. He didn't have all the stress of maybe finances and family and relationships and a lot of those things, work and that you have when you're younger. He can pursue more of his interests, his blog and things like that. He can still get out and walk. So it sounds like when he was writing that, he was more at perhaps that first stage of retirement and aging that you mentioned. But we hear a lot of negativity about aging, but we also accrue wisdom and experience. So I think what Lorraine said earlier, it can become an opportunity as well. This is not to whitewash the challenges, but it is a multifaceted thing, a complex thing like all of life. But something Alwin touched on there, Catherine, and probably a good point to bring you in is as people become more frail, and you would see some of this and the challenges. When does someone go into a home, when not? What are some of the family issues there? What are some of the issues to work through? And I guess a lot of us maybe don't want to give up our independence, yet on the other hand, some people find it quite a relief to be cared for. What are some of your thoughts and observations regarding the issues here?
It's so individual, and it all depends on the individual and often their families, the support they may or may not have. We'll see an individual or a resident that has very supportive family but has lost their spouse, so they may have been cared for by their spouse at home, so they no longer can be cared for. Like, the families aren't able to look after them anymore in their home, so they'll need to come into care. There's people who we've got a husband and wife who both come in together, and you try and keep them together, and that's because they are no longer coping at home. And then we admit people who are 99 and still come in every now and then for respite, but still want to live at home. And they are the ones often who have all the community support packages that you were talking about. Yes. So have I answered that question, Pastor Mike?
You have, thank you. And Lorraine, have you got some thoughts to add to that?
Yeah. I suppose the only thing I'd like to say, there's sometimes quite a lot of resistance from the person who is considering or being considered by family to go into aged care, and you have to weigh up risks, and whilst they're prepared to take some risks, the individual is, I think, yeah, it takes a patient family or even an outsider to talk to them and point out perhaps there are more risks than what they're seeing, and it's dangerous to be in their home. But yeah, this whole matter of letting them take a certain amount of risks, but when it becomes a bit too much, it's a very delicate matter, and to be patient with them.
Often there's a lot of family grief when people admit their families into nursing homes. So often the children, suffer just as much because they don't like to have to put their loved one into care, particularly if there is some resistance from them.
Alwin, Catherine mentioned...
Can I just come in there, Mike?
Sure.
You can, yes.
Catherine mentioned everyone's an individual, I think, at the beginning of her little spiel before.
Mm-hmm.
I live in a retirement village, Lutheran Homes, Glynn, and listen to the stories and reports and comments made by people, and it ranges from the extreme, I thank God for the privilege of being here. I thank God for the privilege of the care that's provided for elderly people. I thank God for fellow people my age with whom I can relate to. I thank God for the services that are provided for me here. It ranges from that on the one hand to, on the other hand, a whinging I wish I weren't old. Being old is difficult. On the day that my wife died, and she had a strong Christian faith and never once really whinged or anything like that. The only whinge that she made was about 5 hours before she died. She looked at me and she said, "Dying is difficult." Mm-hmm. It wasn't a whinge. Mm-hmm. She said it in such a way that this was a reporting of fact, and she then passed away into the loving care of her Lord 5 hours later.
Alwin, Catherine mentioned grief, and Dad's just talked about loss. Grieving is certainly when we do lose a loved one, but in many ways losing health, vitality, independence. Grief can be for many things. Are you able to just share a little bit your reflections on grief?
Yes. Probably the first thing, Mike, would be to talk about what we call our world of loss. Our world of loss is a profound aspect to the whole of our life, because there are different sorts of losses, of course. There are developmental losses. So when I'm a child and when I'm born, I suffer my first loss because the umbilical cord is cut. And that's a first loss, but you grow through that loss to be someone else. But the day I go to school, I lose something because I might be progressing, but I'm leaving something behind. And throughout life, we experience those developmental losses. Like I come to my retirement day, and I no longer am a worker. I don't have the same status that I had as a worker. I'm just one of the old people now. And then, as we get older and older, it might be, there's just nothing left much anymore because you've lost so much. Then there are the sort of losses we suffer through life, which are part of the accidents and the things that happen that way. They can be catastrophes, but we lose things, and then we have all of those things, and we've got an accumulation. Everyone has an accumulation of losses, and they come on a scale of just the littlest things through to the biggest of things. And then we suffer loss through neglect sometimes, through failure, and all of those things help to define our life. As a matter of fact, when you put it all together, and you start to consider what loss is. Most people want to define their lives by all they've achieved and all they've done, but running in the background is that program of loss in our life, and that whole world of my loss has shaped me, and it's shaped every person how they do it. Now, when we grieve, we are responding to our losses, and that grieving can have all sorts of shapes and forms too, and some of them can be an opportunity to grow, and for some people they actually become a thing that affects their lives in a detrimental way, and so rather than growing, they sort of tend to lose more, and then there's a sort of a wall of grief sort of life where just the way people approach it, where some people sort of can go head on into it and deal with things. Other people sort of hold back, and some people want to go around it. And we have this world of loss and the grieving that's there. Now, for every individual, those things will be their loss and grief world. Fortunately, we have a lot of things in common as human beings, and we can compare those things and learn better ways or avoid things that perhaps are not so well to work with. And of course, we have resources for grieving too, like family and loved ones. And needless to say, at the deepest level, spiritually, we have the promises of a God who indeed is dealing with the first great loss that happened in the Garden of Eden, and all of the losses that have followed through that, which he has sort of come to offer us hope through that. But it's a way of looking at our life from the point of view of loss, and when we're getting into aging, losses can be very profound. You know, some of them can be just not little things anymore, because each one becomes sort of a subtraction from life that is going to sort of leave you, at point zero, it would seem, at the very end of life.
Thank you for that. And I might just go back to Dad here, who has experienced the loss of his wife the last 8 weeks, but also I guess she was losing health before that. But also, Dad, you've had your struggles with the melanomas over the last few years, and very much in particularly the last year and a bit. Outwardly we're wasting away, St. Paul says, but inwardly we're being renewed. And I have noticed at times over my ministry, as people get older, there are some who slowly up their attendance at worship, and I'm wondering if they are finding consolation for loss and preparing for the age to come more and more as the reality of loss, of grief, of our finiteness comes home. But can you just add to those thoughts and any personal reflections on the loss you've experienced, particularly in the last few years?
As Alwin was talking, I was reminded of the fact that the end result of grief and coming to grips with loss is acceptance. So you go through the various stages of grief and come to acceptance. I think that suffering and failure, I've had a battle with cancer now for almost 3 years, and now I take it as a matter of fact. I accept it. Perhaps in the early stages I wanted to fight it, but you can't. But having accepted it, I'm living quite comfortably and quite happily now, and rejoicing in the fact that right at the moment I'm in pretty good shape and pretty good health, even though there is a 2-centimetre lesion in my lung, which has to be zapped somehow or other. It's growing rapidly, but I'm in the Lord's hands and have been all my life, and I'm still in his hands. And whether we live for the Lord. Whether we die for the Lord. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we are the Lord's. And I think that's a very important point to take with us into old age and into the difficulties that we face as a part of old age.
Lorraine, was there something you wanted to add to some of those thoughts?
Well, no, not really. I agree with him.
Yeah.
Yes, and yeah, I observed too that perhaps there are more, as you get older, the church attendance and perhaps wanting to do more Bible study, whether there's more time on people's hands or whether they're seeking and knowing that, you know, their end is coming near and that they're just increasing spiritually perhaps, or that's been my observation. And I think in my own life too, whilst the children were a youth, yes, we're youth counsellors, we had Bible studies with youth, but it's different when you're older. You've got more time and you can spend more time in the Word and praying for people. I hope that's not a wrong statement, but that's the way it was for me anyway. You're busy with your almost full-time job as well as the other activities with your children, and mostly they were church orientated, I was happy to say.
I don't want to shock you, Lorraine, but I don't think my time in Bible study and prayer has increased, because it was always pretty full on before that. But what has increased is the intensity of it and the focus of it. Yes. Whereas previously it was perhaps more general, and whether it related to me or not didn't particularly matter. Now it is very focused, very intense,
yes.
And so all the more enriching.
I think that's very accurate, yes.
I think if I could come back,
please.
One of the things that Lorraine mentioned earlier in the discussion about living in seasons and so on, and it does remind me, you know, of there's a season for everything under heaven, and when we do have time for something, you know, we need to take opportunity with that and enjoy that season. And as we grow older, and as I've seen people grow older, that they need to live in that season, and it brings you back to just how to live. And the problem, I think, for a lot of people is learning that. But because through the most of life, we don't live in the season. We sort of tend to be a couple of seasons ahead of ourselves, or otherwise we might be a few seasons back, you know, when things were better. And one of the challenges, I think, of ministry and aging is to encourage people into that acceptance of this day, which is part of the, I think, still the loss and grief thing, is that all of that is past, is gone, you know, and now is a time to do something. But learning to do that is a hard thing. I found in ministry and aged care, a lot of people learn to live a day at a time. And if there's ever a spiritual lesson there, as well as a psychological or whatever other way you want to put it, there's a spiritual thing there. God meant us to live a day at a time. There's no doubt about it, because Jesus spoke about that. He taught us to pray for it when he said, "Give us this day our daily bread." But when I was with older people, I often found myself saying, "Well, you can only live today." And I said it so often that I finally said, "You'd better believe that yourself." And I think one of the things that many older people did help me to understand better, and I think even better than that again for myself, is that you can only have this day that God has given you. And if you can actually learn that much in that, it doesn't matter about all sorts of other things. That day becomes really important for you, because that's the gift you have. And I just find it, I want to have that conversation with so many people. And sometimes what I do lose is that I didn't quite get there and sort of really join and connect with it. But it's so important is that we learn that living in that. People talk about living in the moment and mindfulness and everything like that, but this ultimately is from God. He is the one that made us for that.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, and I think encouraged by, is our attitude and the way we respond to the changing circumstances of life will have a big impact, I guess, on how we see and respond to it, and maybe we can appreciate. We will never go back to certain things in life, they've gone, but acceptance, living in the moment, looking for the opportunities here, adjusting, all those things I think are a part of the wisdom, as you say, from wisdom literature, that there is a time for everything, a season for everything under the sun. We've talked a bit about loss. We'll get to dementia in a moment, but just before we do, age onset depression, or depression that comes with age. Maybe we could start with one of our nurses first on this. Is this something that you've read on or been taught or observed? I believe that it is a clinical thing, that there is a degree of depression that can come with age. Maybe Catherine.
My first thought is actually dealing with medications. I guess I can honestly tell you there are a lot of antidepressants given in aged care, that we actually have a depression scale called a Cornell scale, and you actually assess every resident as they come into a care their level of depression according to this scale. That's also placed as part of the funding instrument, so anyone that does show some sign of depression and or is on medication for it will obviously need more care, which is quite relevant sometimes, quite relevant in terms of requirements for care and needing more funding, more care, that sort of thing. So yes, it is definitely very much, and what you would probably find is that it would be the loss of the independence a lot of the time, is the giving up of being on their own, being able to be home, in their home, caring for themselves, moving away from what's familiar often a home into a one-bedroom room, just a room with the bathroom. Most of their days are probably filled with what once was maybe visits from family or friends, becomes a lot more sparse in that sense. So I guess there is a lot of reasons behind an increase in depression in elderly people.
Lorraine, what has been your observation or understanding of this?
I guess too, in a facility you see a lot of older people, whereas if they could still stay in their home, they might well see other people walking in the streets, younger people, pets. And I think that adds to it too. And I found too, when my parents were aging, that one by one, friends, family, brothers, sisters are dying, and they become lonely. they were both in a facility. Loneliness can set in, and that can often lead to depression as well.
And as our body has, I guess, other little shocks or illnesses or whatever, that can have effects as well. Alwin or Dad, have you got any thoughts or observations? Have you found that as you've aged, you've had to manage yourself a little differently, perhaps, to reduce that or so forth? Any thoughts in this area?
Want to go, Lance?
I was going to say I'll defer to Alwin.
God does give us peace and joy, but we also go through the wilderness, sometimes feel his absence. There are various medical helps, as Catherine has alluded to, spiritual helps, and ultimately we have the eternal joy of the eternal banquet, celebration, feast without end, the marriage supper of the Lamb, as Christians to look forward to. But this life can be marked by loss, and some of that includes our mental faculties. Dementia, it's for the individual heading that way. There's a loss of but there's also a loss very much so for the families and loved ones of that person. Catherine, can you share some thoughts on, well, firstly, just for an amateur like me, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's?
Look, it's, in terms of it's very similar. It's the way it affects the brain, the degree, the rate, where it affects, and that ultimately will have an impact on how the resident or the person behaves or their mannerisms in terms of the different styles of dementia that we see. So, depending on where the loss of the brain, where it's affecting the brain, will often be show where they display in the way they are. It affects, as we know, every age. We're finding quite young people now coming into care, which presents itself with a lot of other issues in itself. Quite young, 60-year-olds less sometimes too. So their families are just unable to cope at home with them anymore. They become quite fatigued in themselves. Often, first of all, it's nighttime wanderings or trying to get out of the house.
Lost you.
We've just lost your sound briefly, Catherine. We'll just see if we can get it back.
Can I come in with a slightly different angle
Yeah,
altogether?
Dad, then Alwin, and we'll see if we can get Catherine's sound back again.
Sorry, gone back again.
Yes,
sorry.
you're back. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Dad and then Alwin. And Catherine, we got most of what you said in,
Sure.
but as Dad and Alwin thinks, you may have some further thoughts in this area to share with us. Dad first.
No, I wasn't going to comment on Alzheimer's or dementia, but rather I'm coming to grips with our mortality. But perhaps you want to put that on hold and have something from Alwin on Alzheimer's.
Okay, we will,
dementia.
and then come back to you in a moment. Alwin.
Yes, I think one of the things that needs to be said, we're talking about Alzheimer's and dementia, but dementia is really an umbrella word that talks about all the decline that can happen through the mind and the brain to people. And there can be numerous causes of dementia where people become less functional in their thinking and behaviours because of what's going in their brain. But identified in that is the condition of Alzheimer's, which is a particular but a very, very common form, but a form of dementia that becomes far more prevalent as people get older, and because people are getting so much older, they're being able to be nursed into great old age, but the incidence of Alzheimer's actually has increased, and that becomes a major factor of care. It's true that people can have dementia at younger ages, and that sometimes can be a genetic thing. And for younger people too, I think they need to be very careful about their lifestyles, because some of the substance abuse and all of those sort of things, plus the problems of being young and careless and getting into accidents and getting knocks on the head and all sorts of things, can create all sorts of problems too. But dementia is particularly hard because it, as people become less able to communicate and to respond, because they don't have the mental faculties to do that, their care levels go up, and that creates a whole avalanche of problems in caring, in families, and in all sorts of ways. It's a major challenge, as obviously the news items continually talk about, but it's with us, and it's talk about the COVID-19. If that goes away tomorrow, we're still going to have dementia as a challenge.
Yeah. Indeed, and you talk about lifestyle. Our understanding continues to grow, and the change in attitude in the sporting codes to concussion, for example, it's taken very seriously now, whereas, back in the day it was get back on the field sort of thing. But yes, and the wonderful movie, I think it might have been by that name, Concussion, with Will Smith, if you're ever looking for a movie, the doctors that first discovered the connection here with, early loss of memory and health effects as one ages. A great movie, and the way they were opposed every step of the way as the research was unfolding. Are there some more thoughts on the whole area of dementia that you'd like to share, Catherine?
I think you could. Well, I wouldn't even know where to start. The challenges are massive. They don't. I don't even. Yeah. Have you got anything in particular you want me to actually talk about, though?
Doing puzzles, reading. Are they helps?
They're certainly absolutely very helpful. We have, they introduce lifestyle type activities. Definitely there are things that they are able to do. We actually have outside resources to help us, Dementia Support Australia, who actually will come into the facility and do a thorough one-on-one assessment with a resident, and they will often help us look into their past. And for example, if they were a mechanic, the idea of actually getting something with tools started, or a builder, blocks, trying to distract the resident by using their past, their interests, their hands, if that's what they worked with. It's all about individual care, actually looking at the resident themselves, and providing them quality of care, because often they can't think to do those things for themselves anymore, but they know that in the past that gave them enjoyment and satisfaction. So then to be able to present them with these opportunities within the aged care sector actually helps their journey, and prevents boredom, and relieves the behaviours, takes often their need to wander or want to get out, or so.
I have observed thanks for that, I've observed over the years some wonderfully devoted husbands, wives, etc., who, with dementia, following strokes, when the person can only lie there and groan, they still visit very regularly and show devotion. And I take my hats off to to those people and the commitment they show. Lorraine, in the whole area of dementia, I guess we're in God's hands going forward, and we take it a step at a time, and He will be with us even when we can't remember Him. He remembers us.
Yeah, just tune into what they still enjoy doing, and and it's amazing. Some people that are quite not able to look after themselves very well can still do that crossword because they've done it all their lives. So just tuning into what they can still do.
I think that's to be affirmed, because I think sometimes when people are withdrawing, one of the worst things we can do is withdraw from them, and being active in that way. And I know in the care they give in the aged care residences, they really know that helps their work too, to be able to connect to people, whereas if they left them to sit. I remember early in my ministry, I used to visit what was once an unaccredited aged care facility, where people were just lined up on a veranda in an old house in Queensland, and they were sat opposite one another all day virtually, and all they got was wheeled into their mealtime and wheeled back onto the veranda, and that wasn't really the way to go. And nowadays there is so much more effort, and with knowledge that we gain, how we can make those lives, so much more comfortable, and reach those people. They might not be able to respond in all the ways we'd like, but it's something that we can do, and just always searching what can we do.
Yeah, I hope they've got a sewing machine for me when I get there.
Excellent, indeed. Dad, for all the progress, or some so-called progress, and there are ways we've learnt and benefited as we've gone along as a human race, but we still have 100% mortality rate. There are limits we'll never get beyond, and limits we need to accept when we try to make the world a utopia. We sometimes actually distort things. Yes, we are to put in place things that are good for us and healthy, but this 100% mortality rate, you were going to talk about the subject of accepting our mortality and coming to grips with our mortality.
Yes, it's perhaps one of the hardest things we face in life, coming to grips with our mortality. It's there all through life. In younger years, middle-aged years, we sort of deny it and don't think about it. And even in old age, we tend not to think about it. I was very impressed in ministering to a man, this was in my retirement years as a locum pastor, a man who had terminal cancer. And he said to me, I've come to grips with my mortality. He said, I'm a Vietnam veteran. I never came to grips with my mortality in Vietnam because always I thought, I'll get out of this. I'll get back to Australia and I'll be alive. He said, now there is no way that I'm going to get out of this. The doctor has said I've got so much longer to live, and I've had to come to grips with my mortality. And he looked at me with a smile on his face and said, you know how I've come to grips with my mortality? He said, I've studied the life of Jesus. And I looked at him, and I've known that throughout his life, he knew that he was here for death. He came to grips with his mortality, realizing that the purpose behind it was the rescue and salvation of the world. There will be glory to God coming through my death and my coming to grips with my mortality also.
We'll start to wrap up soon, but maybe if we just go around and this is a time for you just to choose whatever hobby horse you want as we begin to wrap up. Anything maybe that you've thought of as we've spoken, something maybe we haven't addressed that we should have. We'll start with you, Alwin. Have you got any further thoughts you'd like to share as we begin to wrap up?
Right. You should never give anyone a hobby horse to play with. Mike, that's dangerous, because I could be here for the rest of the night. But anyway, in all fairness, look, just to wrap up, I want to talk, as a Christian at this point, for all the things you might know or learn, but as a Christian, we live by grace. That's the thing. But it's a thought that I reflect on very often. But we have so much in the word grace that it has to do with living. It's not only grace by which we're saved, but grace is God's gift to us to practice towards others, because that when we are forgiven, we learn to forgive, and that's an act of grace. We don't put conditions on it, and with that we also have those adverbs like graciously, and we talk about growing old graciously. For some people, that would probably be a reflection on the conditions under which they live. They might have a very nice house to live in, and can have a glass of wine at the end of the day and have lots of friends around, and you can be very gracious in that sort of sense too. But graciously is accepting that I only live by grace, and I don't ask for more, because everything is a gift. The word grace has a lot to do with the idea of then gifts, because when someone says something, gives something to you, you say thank you. It's interesting that if you're in a Latin-speaking country, they'll say gratias, for thank you. Or if you're in France, they'll say merci, which is mercy, which is grace. And it's interesting that thankfulness needs to fill our lives, and we take that into all things. Paul says, in all things be thankful, and a lot of my conversations are with people who say there is so much to be thankful for, and that's true. But with that, there's always the condition that perhaps there are things you're not to be thankful for. But I would say just learn somehow or other, by God's grace, to be thankful in all things. And whatever it is, whether it's a hard time, a loss, or in everything, you can start with thank you, Heavenly Father, and because your mercy endures forever. And let that grow and take root more and more in your life. I have my moments when I get cranky and disappointed and so on, but the one that brings me back to reality is the fact that I need to live in that grace and thankfulness. So that's all I need to say, I think.
Well, I think that's wonderful, and another word that maybe comes from grace too is gratitude, and which brings us actually just briefly to a question we received. Okay, boomers. Well, some of us are actually, some here may be builder generations, but you got the best jobs, the incredible real estate spike, the booming stock market, used a lot of the world's resources. We get huge government debt, inflated and prohibitive property prices, often just piecework, and corporations which, not like what many of you would have often experienced, are just out to use and exploit us. Please help us understand our situation, as I ask this sincerely on behalf of the millennials and Gen Zers. I gave it a bit of a thought. Well, some younger ones come from smaller families, which means that maybe they can get some family help to get into the market, where with bigger families that wouldn't have been the case. They get gadgets that people didn't. Look, I don't want to whitewash some of their issues, but I think looking to God, looking at what they do have, the opportunities they do have, the pay that some of us got when we first started was virtually nothing. So it's not all black and white, but do any of you want to come in on this and add some thoughts?
I would simply say that God is for us, no matter what our circumstances might be. Every individual and every age, every generation is different. It's no good, it doesn't get me very far if I bemoan my lot and think that the lot of my neighbour is far better, or the lot of a previous generation or possibly a future generation is better. I must learn to be content with what I am given and the situation in life in which I find myself now, and recognise that life, no matter what its circumstances, external circumstances might be, life is always a precious gift of God, whether it's physical life or spiritual life, life here or life there.
Look, I appreciate that, and I've really enjoyed, in my ministry, one of the things I've enjoyed the most as far as visiting goes is visiting older people, hearing some of their stories, their wisdom they've accrued over the years, and we can learn so much from them, and particularly some of those that have come out from Europe or other places as refugees or have experienced hardship. We can learn so much from them. I agree. The whole thing is, every generation has its opportunities and its challenges. We can learn from each other and give to each other and share our knowledge and wisdom. Lorraine, as we wrap up, is there anything that you have thought of as this has gone on that you'd like to share with us?
I like Psalm 139, in verse 13, for you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. That's a recipe for life. We are still very valuable no matter what stage of our life. And God, we can serve God in a different way right through our lives. So we mustn't forget that we are very valuable. And God loves us.
God loves us, and the great thing about the Christian faith, the gospel, we're made in God's image.
Yes.
He loves us, He cares for us, He provides for us. It's not about our performance.
That's
it's
right.
about us being His beloved children, His great love for us. He values us so much that in Christ, God came to redeem us, bring Him. And I've appreciated that the attitude that's run through the whole program of it's how we view things. A lot of things are attitude. It's not to dismiss the challenges we have, but the attitude, and as Alwin said, as we all do, we have our grumpy moments, our venting moments, but it's how we face things in life that's a huge thing, and our Christian faith gives us so much resources in this area. Kath, as we're wrapping up, are there some thoughts you've had that you'd like to share?
I'd just like to say I loved what Lance said, that life is a precious gift, and I guess I'm just so privileged to be able to just care for those people now who are at the final stages of life, a lot of them, to try and make it a quality time for them. I must admit, often I'm working with non-Christian people, but I still try and keep my faith alive and let that reflect through my work and my love and care for those I care for. Yeah.
Well, I take this opportunity to also encourage you. I was at a funeral recently. Someone who works with you spoke glowingly about your work. Also, I came across someone who spoke similarly about your brother Nathan some time ago, who's also a nurse, but also to all our carers. Thank you so much for those who care as you do, and Lorraine has as nurses, Alwin as a aged care pastor for quite some time, our chaplains, but just so many people in their everyday life. Those who just simply show respect to those who are more elderly. I think that's a wonderful thing to do, and possibly something that we could rediscover a little bit more of in our culture as a whole. The wisdom, the resources we have in our aged people, what we can draw from them. Someone's worth is not how quickly they can search something or find something on the internet, but you know, the wisdom accrued over many years that they're able to share the good and sound advice that often isn't found readily on the internet, but is there if you truly search for it. Dad, have you got some concluding thoughts as well?
No, I think I'll simply repeat what I said earlier on and what Catherine has already endorsed. Life is a precious gift of God. We should appreciate it and thank him for it, and thank him for the life of others and our privilege in caring and helping others live their lives.
Well, again, that appreciation, that thankfulness, what we have in Christ, his triumphs, everything will be made new. And talking of thankfulness, we had a very dry spell last year and a very dry summer, but since autumn we've had a number of big rains, and I'm hearing it every now and then on our roof through this still. So I'm very thankful for those simple things on life when God shows us his mercy, to use that word again, Alwin, by sending us wonderful gifts like rain to replenish our gardens, our farms and so forth. So we are thankful for God's mercies and look forward to the great healing, the great restoration to come. Thank you for coming onto this broadcast, for sharing some of your thoughts, your observations, your learnings with us. This program, this topic was particularly requested, so I'm sure it's been a help and an encouragement to a number of people. And please, those who have tuned in, feel free to share this, and we will make it available in various places too. Wonderful having you. I hope you have a good and restful night, and God's richest blessings to you all going ahead.
And to you too.
To you too. Thank you, Pastor.
Good night.